Me.
Perfect. And we're live. Morning, Bruno. How are you?
Hey Nick, how you doing?
Well, thank you. Our last PLA for the year 2024. Can you believe it?
Absolutely. I hope people got value out of it. But yeah, I mean, sure, we need a break as well, but we'll be right back in January answering more of those questions.
Yep, fantastic. And then let's jump into our questions for today. So,
Sure.
Bruno, we get a lot of questions from our clients relating to tax efficiencies. And basically, something that people are being told to have a look at is tax efficiencies when buying properties. And I thought you could just highlight a little bit of that issue, just things that people should consider in the circumstances.
Sure, thanks, Nick. So tax efficiency when buying property is actually quite a complex field of our law. Tax is very dynamic, and there's a lot of different components to it. But when we do look at tax efficiency from a property investor perspective, I always try and simplify it by looking at long-term efficiency, short-term efficiency. And remember, when I say efficiency, I'm not saying evasion. I'm not saying finding illegal or illegitimate ways of avoiding the payment of tax. These are all methods that are not approved, but they're contained in the legislation and they're allowable. And when we look at short-term and long-term tax efficiency, these are two very different components. So long-term tax efficiency is often when a person is doing their legacy planning. They want to find out how a property is going to move from one generation to the other. And we look at long-term planning, and we address taxes like estate duty, because these are the taxes that will come to be payable once a person passes away. Whereas your short-term tax efficiency are the types of taxes that one deals with on an ongoing basis, on a daily basis. And you try to find ways of structuring them so that they are not as cumbersome or as high as one would sometimes find in an inefficient structure. So, I mean, stupid examples of this is if a person in their personal capacity has a very high income tax rate as per the tax brackets, and they're paying tax at 45%, say. It might actually be a smarter idea to pay tax through a company rather, which is only 27%. And that is totally allowable. Companies are designed for the purpose of conducting business, and it does have a lower tax rate on income that comes in. Just bear in mind, then if you're trying to get money out of the company and you're declaring a dividend, for example, there are going to be certain tax consequences for the declaration of a dividend. In short, what I normally tell clients is there's efficiency, but the SARS and Treasury has obviously given this some thought. The same way that a person might want to donate assets into a trust, and donations tax is 20%. That's very similar to what the estate duty would be. So one way or another, you might land up having to pay tax at some point in time. The efficiencies come in realizing that if you donate, for example, into a trust, then you're paying a donations tax, say, at 20%. And at the very least, the asset is now in the trust. It's almost ring-fenced in the trust to the point where all the future capital growth is now in the trust, meaning that if when you pass away 20 years later, the asset has grown by 300%, you'd be paying that 20% estate duty on an asset that's now far, far more valuable versus the 20% that you paid now if you had donated it. So small little considerations like that are what make the biggest difference in a legitimate tax plan to assist you in saving sometimes millions in tax just because you've applied your mind correctly on which taxes would be paid when and how you can mitigate the amount of tax that you're going to pay.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Cool. So now next question, interesting one, because in the South African context, I think we do, believe it or not, we actually see this more often than one would think, especially with game farms, especially with farms in general. What you find is that animals tend to find their way from one farm to the other, as an example, from one building or one house into a neighboring farm. So, and it's not just necessarily the agricultural or farming space, but the game farms or just typically farms, even if it's agricultural, but they have dogs or some sort of animal on one area and another animal gets inside. We've had situations. So this particular question is around the death of a buck on a landlord's farm, which was caused by one of the dogs of the tenant. So the tenant escaped the property. The tenant escaped the tenant. Sorry, the dog escaped the property and went into the landlord's farm and managed to kill the buck. And now the landlord, be obviously quite upset about this, would want to cancel the lease. But we've also seen situations, for example, where there's been a breeding of two different animals. One escapes, goes into the other one, and now there's breeding and there's potential babies, and sometimes these are prize animals. So maybe, Nick, just give us a kind of a broad view on your experiences when it comes to the sort of animal engagement.
So what's interesting about South African law when it comes to animals is we've got two different categories of animals that we recognize within South African law. And that is domesticated animals and wild animals. And these, they're both treated as a thing in our law, but these things are viewed differently in how they're applied. So when you have a domesticated animal, these are your normal dogs and cats and sort of things that are common to a household. Um, they are treated as the responsibility of the owner of the particular animal. Okay, so if you have a dog, you as the owner of this domesticated animal have a responsibility to ensure its behavior. Okay, and this is where people can become liable for the conduct of their dog. If you have your dog and it bites someone or it causes some damage, you can be held liable for the actions of your dog. It's your responsibility to make sure that they don't cause harm in the circumstances. This is different to wild animals. Okay, wild animals will, I'm going to just talk about normal sort of wild animals, nothing specialized at the moment where you've got to have certain licenses and ways of keeping them because there are responsibilities attached to that. But other wild animals like a buck, okay, this is treated as a wild animal. So you're not, as an owner, responsible for necessarily the conduct of that particular animal because there's a recognition that you don't necessarily have control over the animal. Okay. And usually what that animal will do is it will accede to the land that it is on. So a distinction here is if your dog runs over to your neighbor's property, it doesn't become your neighbor's dog. It's still your dog. You're still responsible for its conduct while it's on the property. But buck and wild animals are not necessarily the same. They can pass onto other people's property, and the natural way that the law works in South Africa is that buck will accede to the land. It becomes sort of ancillary to the land upon which it's grazing. Okay, this is obviously there's a lot of adjustments with fencing and stuff like that. There's a lot of other laws, but I don't want to go into that. I just want to do this distinction for the minute. So in terms of our question, we've got a tenant who has a dog that's on a property, and now it's killed the buck in the circumstance. So what I've already pointed out is the tenant is responsible for the conduct of the dog in the circumstances. Now the landlord's asking, can they cancel the lease? The fact that the dog attacked the buck is in this particular circumstances really neither here nor there because the lease agreement didn't allow a dog. So whether the dog there was an attack or not an attack, there's still a breach of the lease agreements in the circumstances. And so, in order for the landlord to cancel, you just follow the normal concept of contract law. So, you're going to look at the provisions of your contract to see what does your contract require in the circumstances if there is a breach. Okay, so if your contract provides for a 7-day breach, you're going to use that. If the Consumer Protection Act applies in the circumstance.
Sorry, Nick, I think your volume, there you go.
sorry, I dipped off for a second. Just follow the provisions of your agreement as it's stated. All right. And that will enable you to cancel.
You back?
Sorry, Bruno, I'm back. I don't know what's happening. This is dropping. Do you want to try again?
Yeah, let's do it.
Is it too much now? Should we start again and just I'll try do it
Yeah, and
quickly.
then I suppose we can just cut it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, cool. Do you want me to just start now?
Try start again from there. We'll just let them know they need to cut it nicely. It's magic of editing.
Sure. Okay, so Nick, next question is around animals, especially when they relate to property leases in South Africa.
Damn it.
Well, what's happening is there's just a dip there.
It's just dipping a little, that's all.
No worries. Sorry, why are you doing that? Ari, where did it fall? Oh, there. Maybe you can bring it to an album. Right?
How much trophies did I win?
I need to count.
You mean really one?
Yeah.
I won 2 trophies.
You really won. You guys played with team.
No, my other one.
I know what you mean, but you guys play as a team. Okay, so
It's mine. It's mine.
yes, but you guys still play as a team. I like the family.
But it's mine.
It is yours. So just relax now. Okay. You need advanced form. There we go.
What's the last one? I think
Yeah.
Nope.
Okay. Please be nice while I finish. Are you good?
Yeah, it looks like it.
So I'm doing chess coaching and
That's
Yeah, mate.
that's all right. That's okay. Sorry about that. Let's try it again. I'll try be quick so we can avoid that.
okay. Sorry, 1 sec. Guys, go. Sequence. No, why don't you just make space for the other one? You're not going to say anything.
I'm just gonna understand.
Okay, no, make space for Anya. And see, she won't say anything. She just wants to watch you play.
She did some.
You're already speaking.
You did.
No, you did that. Guys. Don't blame what you did. Okay. Okay, you ready? No,
Yep.
yeah, it is on you.
In my one.
No. Stay low. Yeah. Cool. All right, I'm ready. Let's do
Cool.
this. Take number 4.
Yeah.
All right. Cool, Nick. So, especially in the South African landscape and framework, we do experience a lot of questions when it comes to property leasing and a situation where there's wild animals present on property and they move from one property to the other. And then there's domestic animals and possible injury to the wild animals or other sort of farming animals, the breeding issues. So maybe speak a little bit about that. We have the question particularly here is around a domesticated animal, a dog, that escaped one property, went into the other property, the landlord's property, and managed to kill a buck in the process. And the landlord obviously now being aggrieved, wanting to cancel the lease agreement. So maybe just take us through the laws relating to that.
Okay, perfect. So just to start out, I want to do a little distinction on animals within South Africa because it's important for our context. So in South African law, we distinguish between 2 different types of animals. There are domesticated animals. These are your normal dogs, cats, things that you would ordinarily have around a household. And then there are wild animals, which are the wilder animals, things you don't keep around the house, buck, etc. And the way that these animals are treated in our law differs. Okay. When you have a domesticated animal, you as an owner of a domesticated animal are responsible for the conduct of your domesticated animal. It's your responsibility as the owner to ensure that your domesticated animals don't damage other people's property. Okay. And when your animal moves around, you still retain ownership of that particular animal. So if your dog runs off and it goes onto someone else's property, it's still your dog and you're still responsible for the conduct that it has when it's on someone else's land. Okay. It's slightly different when it comes to wild animals. Okay. And the ownership of that animal doesn't necessarily attach to the person who owns it. The ownership of that animal exceeds to the land, and there's responsibility for damages that those animals might cause is not necessarily just put onto the owner. There are other questions like negligence, etc., on what you were doing, but those animals are treated as wild. So the conduct is not necessarily imputed onto the owner of those particular animals just by virtue of the ownership. Okay, so this is the distinction we have. And in this particular question, we've got a tenant whose dog has run onto the landlord's property and has killed a buck in the circumstances. So, as I've already pointed out, as the tenant, you are responsible for the conduct of your dog. Even if it moves onto the landlord's farm, it's your responsibility to make sure that your dog doesn't cause damages in the circumstances. So in this question, we've been asked, the landlord wants to go ahead and cancel the lease agreement. And we've been told that the lease agreement does not allow for dogs to be on the particular lease premises. So in this question, what's interesting is even though there's been this incident where the dog has killed the buck, the ability for the landlord to cancel in the circumstances actually won't be contingent on that particular incident having happened. The lease agreement itself says that there's no ability to have dogs on the particular premises, and so the fact that the tenant has a dog on the premises is simply a breach of the lease agreement, like any other breach in the circumstances. So for the landlord to cancel the lease agreement, they are simply going to give a breach notice as any other breach in terms of the lease agreement. You're going to follow the provisions of the lease agreement on what the time period is. So 7 days if that's required by the lease agreement. Please remember, if the Consumer Protection Act applies to that particular agreement, I don't have the facts on that, but if the Consumer Protection Act does apply, then you will have to follow the provisions of the Consumer Protection Act, give 20 business days notice, and then simply cancel if the breach is not remedied. So in this circumstance, you are demanding that they remove the dog in the circumstances. I understand that is harsh. We do have a lot of clients who come in, where they've been demanded to remove dogs or whatever the case is, and it is a touchy issue. But unfortunately, in circumstances where the lease agreement doesn't allow for dogs to occupy the premises, those provisions have to be followed by the tenants in the circumstances. So simple breach notice, cancellation in the event that the breach is not remedied.
There we go. Awesome. Thanks so much, Nick. And yeah, to all our viewers, well, I think this video is going to be cut, so I'm going to say this anyway, though. But to all our viewers, Merry Christmas and see you next year.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Bruno.
Cheers.
And have a good holiday.